Welcome everyone to the manufacturing transportation session. I'm David Rogers. I'll be kicking us off here with the foundations of industrial data intelligence, and then I'll be handing it over to a good friend, John Brown from the Boeing company, who will talk through a NOTAMs application within aviation. So as we begin, really want to start talking about what are some of the challenges that industrials are facing, and how do we think about the ways data intelligence can start to address those challenges. So as we dive in, think about all the disruptions that are occurring. So certainly in aerospace and automotive and many businesses, there's disruptions happening faster and faster than ever. If you go back just a couple decades ago, maybe you could wake up in the morning, take a look at the newspaper, kind of scan the periodicals for kind of what happened, and then maybe make a phone call to go figure out what to do for the day. That world is no longer. Nowadays, there's globalization, supply chains are running across the world, there's disruptions happening in one part of the world that cascade to another part of the world as you all seek new supply bases to go after, new markets to enter. All of these things affect the way you run your business today and the way you run your supply chains. And in order to take countermeasures on these disruptions, you need an information picture. So we'll touch on that in a second, but think about all these disruptions and how you handle them today and the pain that it takes to address those. The second biggest trend that I see as I talk to clients is around loss of knowledge. Many manufacturers are scared of their workforce retiring. During COVID, certainly a lot of the largest population generation here in America kind of retired, the baby boomers. That certainly affected aerospace supply chains heavily and production. The markets kind of changed as well, so that disruption that occurred. So being able to capture these sources of knowledge, whether it's the tacit knowledge or the explicit knowledge, and being able to represent that in a data system has been very, very challenging, especially when you think about the research of what this ratio of tacit to explicit actually is. And some research indicates over 90% of the knowledge within your enterprise is tacit knowledge. And being able to capture that before people walk out the door, encode it in a data system to make it explicit is very, very challenging. But I'll tell you some ways of how you can impact that with Databricks. But the last one is this never-ending digital transformation that I'm sure many of you have gone through. So not only are disruptions happening more and more frequently, but so are technology cycles. Technology cycles are being compressed. They're happening more frequent. They go quicker. They're measured in years, sometimes even months now, especially with all these AI technologies. And so you're stuck kind of experimenting and trying to get these things to production. But you end up, maybe you end up getting it there to production, but it doesn't actually get a return. So how do you think about addressing that? I'll show you a couple ways that we're thinking about here at Databricks to help you all overcome this, both on quality, cost, and privacy, to make sure that you're not just experimenting with technology, but you're actually driving it into the business processes that run your business. And so how are industrials building this new foundation? Well, they're using the data intelligence platform, of course, and it's really those two components around unified data governance and AI that understands how you do business. And so the first thing to do to respond to these disruptions, I kind of forecasted it a little bit here, but you have a bunch of real-time data streams that you need access to. So if you're operating 24/7 across the world, we're going to talk about NOTAMs here in a second, but you need to understand weather disruptions. You need weather data. You need to understand the market data that's responding to these disruptions real time. Can I access certain critical materials? You need to know about risk of suppliers. Are they in a part of the world under certain regulatory concerns? All of these things you need to be able to sense, bring it into your knowledge, and have that so that you can make better, smarter decisions faster. So Databricks with Unity Catalog and Delta Sharing and Marketplace and Clean Rooms have created foundational technologies to make this instantaneous. So be able to access large data instantaneous for all of your suppliers that you need to be able to understand and operationalize. Second, you need to be able to encode that knowledge, that implicit knowledge, into agent systems. So you heard at the keynote this morning about some of the future of agent systems here at Databricks. And one of the ways that, if you think about testing, evaluating the AI agents, that's one way to bring this implicit knowledge into the explicit. It's much easier for an expert to evaluate and review a plan than it is to create the plan. So being able to reason about that data, put that feedback in the system, you're providing a new pathway, a completely new information pathway to capture, was that a good plan that was generated by the agent or not? And so now you can encode that knowledge, that implicit knowledge, into explicit and start to have agents take over some of the loss of knowledge because they're able to automate the things in the business processes with guardrails and evaluation, monitoring, a full tool stack for you to be able to do that. And then lastly, you want to be able to take all these tools within the Databricks platform and put it into action. And you want to have outcomes, so you don't want to be stuck in this digital transformation endlessly, but you actually want to think about what are the use cases that are going to drive your success. So these are things around product performance. Maybe you want to understand how to maintain an asset that's generating energy, and you want to make sure you bring the right equipment, you have the right troubleshooting manual, you're taking the right safety precautions, so you have a field service assistant. Maybe you're trying to understand, I'll show you a live demo here in a second, to how a product's performing in the field, an automotive product or an airplane, be able to connect all that data from engineering to social media feedback to manufacturing to capture maybe where a product escape may have occurred. In the industrial AI realm, being able to connect to your operational data stores like Aviva, bring that in, do process monitoring, natural language SPC, digital twinning, all of these things are now possible, but actually understand, if I save an hour of downtime, how much is that worth? Being able to really quantify that so that as you roll out that machine learning model at scale across your manufacturing network, you know that the impact that drives in cost savings or cost avoidance. And then lastly, on digital supply chain, things around order reallocation, being able to respond to tariff events or evolving trade rules that are happening every day, every hour, or figuring out new ways to generate new business or tune your business for automated quoting, things where you're engineer to order, you're trying to understand various constraints and be able to optimize that for what makes the most profit or is the most resource efficient, whatever those may be. So let's take a look into how the platform actually brings these to life. We're going to start with the automated quoting solution here. And you can see this is an AI/BI dashboard. We can get a quick state of the world of what the AI agent is doing. We see how many quotes are accepted, how many are rejected. We're kind of figuring out, we can tune this balance to what makes sense for our business at the time. If you think about what this looks like today in your business, you maybe have to talk to your analysts who are generating these quotes. They have to figure out, okay, do I have all the information? Can I actually respond to this? They maybe look up what the true cost of a similar job was in the past, or a similar load, or you're trying to do airline pricing, you're doing dynamic pricing real time for consumers. So you really want to be able to kind of optimize, given the current information set at the time of generating that quote, make the best business decision and make it quickly. So you can win that work. You can win that order, win that business, and accelerate your revenue stream. So you can go in here, you can of course generate all sorts of different charts, and then you can look into details of the quotes. We want to see kind of, was a certain quote accepted? We want to evaluate this. Was this the right decision? Maybe we want to reason and think about this at the executive level of what quote should we be accepting. You can start to make those decisions directly in the meeting. You don't have to do this another analysis, review, and iteration. You're able to go right in and evaluate and have that full information picture available at your fingertips. If we look at a product performance use case, in electric vehicles, you want to understand where the battery was assembled, make sure that it wasn't a manufacturing defect, and then take a look at how the product is performing in the field. So you can take social media posts, use AI functions to quickly get a sentiment review of this. I don't have to write a line of code. It's just able to do this automatically because you have data intelligence built into the platform. If we want to understand the engineering, how it's comparing across model years, as we are doing R&D, we're updating the battery. It's a rapidly evolving space. So we want to see, is this newest battery with the newest warranty performing the way we saw it in the lab, or has it regressed? We can also evaluate from third-party marketplaces on Databricks like AccuWeather, be able to see, is it affected or correlated with environmental conditions where this vehicle is operating? All these different information, you are able to bring it together and start to ask questions. And if you want to go deeper, hey, the information I have in the dashboard isn't available, you can simply ask Genie. So if we go back here on the quoting, we can ask Genie directly built in the dashboard. We don't need to build another dashboard. We can ask it right here. So we can ask, hey, how many quotes were created over the last thing? We're not seeing the right business kind of come in, or we think we can do more. We can very quickly get an answer. We don't have to go back to our analyst to go figure that out. We do that real time here directly during this presentation or in the meeting. So that's a little bit about Databricks, how we're bringing data intelligence to life, and defining this with outcomes that you can directly insert into your core business process within your business. And so really, what we've spent the last bit of time here is this is all defined in our outcome map. So this is your guide to be able to bring these directly into your business. Each one of these use case areas are something we're building solutions around. We're incorporating AI agents. We're incorporating marketplace data, giving you that full information picture of how you actually build out these solutions. So take a look at that QR code, and this is where I'll leave it, and I'll turn it over to John. Welcome John to the stage.
All right, well, imagine you're getting into the car, and you're going to the grocery store. And if you're like me, I like to get in and out. I like to get there as fast as I can. I like to stick to my grocery list, hopefully not deviate, get the ice cream that I probably shouldn't be getting, and then get back home. But now imagine that as you're getting to the car, your wife, your significant other, they give you a list or a pile of sticky notes, maybe 50 sticky notes, right? And on there, they will say different things. It might be, hey, there's birds by the road 5 miles down, watch out. Or they might say that stoplight is out two streets down. You don't normally go that way, but just in case. Right? Or it might be that there's a road closure, and you do need to change your route. And these aren't organized. They may have acronyms or bad handwriting, whatever it is. That's what it's like to get NOTAMs for pilots and dispatchers today. And so what we're going to be talking about is going from that pile of sticky notes to an organized briefing, from fragmentation to flow. But first, who am I? My name is John Brown. I'm a senior architect with Boeing Digital Aviation Services, working with Jeppesen. I've been with the company for about 16 years, working on a variety of projects and programs across flight planning, flight deck, and charting. And for the last year or so, I've been working with the NOTAMs team, and we've been looking at how can we improve our data pipelines and processes. What technology insertion can we leverage to automate and leverage some of these cool, great things like AI going forward. And so as a part of that effort, working with the team, we wanted to share with you guys some of the insights and experiences that we've had over that time period. Of course, it's not just me. We have several teams inside Boeing and Jeppesen supporting NOTAMs. This is just a few of those. And if you tally up the number of years that we have on the NOTAMs team on how long these people have been doing it, just on this page alone, you have over 100 years of experience focusing on NOTAMs. So we have people who have been doing this for a long, long time. 29, 25, 20 plus years is not uncommon just in this domain. And also, we do have several of those team members here today, so if you do have questions or want to learn more, feel free to come by and talk to us afterwards. But so what is a NOTAM? Well, NOTAM is a Notice to Airmen, Notice to Air Mission, right? It looks like this. How many of you can read this NOTAM? Up on, okay. I see like 2 hands, okay. I was going to say there's no test after this, but we might need one. I don't know. All right, so a NOTAM is essentially a mechanism that countries use to provide data that is temporary or time-sensitive in nature. And it's something that's very important. It's flight safety critical information or it might be information that's going to help the airline operations and whatnot. And so examples might be hazards, like a runway is closed. Might be a temporary flight restriction. Don't fly here, okay? It might include temporary outages, like lighting is out, or there's nav aid out of service, right? It could be environmental conditions, like NOTAMs, SNOTAMs, or ASHTAMs. Right, so this is stuff that we don't want to miss. Where do they go? They go in the hands of pilots and dispatchers. We send them worldwide to airline operation centers, as well as to the flight deck for pilots. So, what's happening here is a dispatcher will get a NOTAM at the operation center, and they'll say, as they're doing their flight plan calculations, they'll make sure that if a NOTAM is going to impact or change their route in some way, that they'll update the flight accordingly. And then, of course, right before the pilot takes off, they're looking at this in their EFB, their electronic flight bag, and the pilot's going to make sure there's no hazards that would impact their flight. And here are some examples of some close calls and problems we've had in the past when NOTAMs were missed or not identified. Some here even in San Francisco. And so this is why NOTAMs are so important. Now, the key thing to note here is that they're situational. It's very contextual based on where you're flying, what aircraft you're flying, right? Some NOTAMs may be very applicable to you, but not to others. So we gotta get the right NOTAM to the right person at the right time. And Jeppesen, as a worldwide aggregator of navigational data and NOTAM information, I think is in a unique spot where we can really see how the industry as a whole is experiencing some of the problems that we have and how can we improve them. How can we make sure that the pilot isn't inundated with all this data that they're seeing? So what is the problem? Well, essentially it's this. This is a famous quote that we've used for many years, and it's 7 years old. And unfortunately, if you ask pilots today what they would feel about NOTAMs or how they would feel about NOTAMs, it likely would not change. They'd still feel something like this. In fact, this is some of the feedback that we've gotten from our customer advisory boards and as we reach out and talk to customers, and you'll see that there's always room for improvement, right? In fact, I know a number of pilots that I've talked to over the years, good personal friends, and I made the mistake of telling them what I did for a living. And of course, they immediately said, well, John, here's all the complaints I have about NOTAMs, right? Yeah, it was a little rough. They said, John, don't send me a list of 1,000 NOTAMs. John, don't send me the NOTAM that's 5 miles away about birds, right? That's not going to impact me. And so we're trying to figure out how can we do things better. And you might be a little upset too if you had to read this every time you went into a car. So here's some random examples from some of the customers that we have. Unfiltered NOTAMs for both domestic and international flights. But as you can see, it's very commonly, very easily could be 100 for domestic and even up to 5, 6, even sometimes 1,000 NOTAMs if you're talking international. And the volume just continues to increase. Now today in production, we have anywhere from 65 to 75,000 NOTAMs that are active, probably about 1 to 1.2 million canceled NOTAMs over a 93-day period. But what we're looking at here is the ingest of these NOTAMs. And so every year we're getting more and more ingest NOTAMs that are coming from all the different ANSPs. And so that might be the FAA, might be NATS or NAV Canada, et cetera. And so how do we keep up with this increasing workload, right? Because the trend is clear, it's not going to go down. How do we find that needle in the haystack? Well, we have some tools for that today that many airlines and customers use. One of them is called NMT, NOTAM Management Tool. This is a mechanism that airlines can use to configure their NOTAM feed, essentially, to help filter and sort through those NOTAMs, make sure that they're reducing the cognitive workload that we have for dispatchers and pilots to filter out the noise, right? Not see every NOTAM that gets delivered or would be delivered to them. And also, we're starting to visually display these NOTAMs. So this is a screenshot from a beta release for FD Pro. Supports over 75% of the commercial market worldwide, and we're super excited about this. So this is an area where, at a glance, the customer can go into the app, they can see what runways are closed, taxiways are limited, those sort of things. And this is something that the team's working on for a number of years, and it's really exciting to be able to see it visually, just at a glance, what's impacting me. So we've made good progress, right? We have these tools, we're getting there, right? It's pretty neat, but I think as an engineer, as an architect, as a technologist, I think we can do better. And so how do we go from hundreds of NOTAMs to single digits? How do we deliver the right NOTAM to the right place at the right time is the question. Okay, and that's where we're really starting to look at Databricks. How can we optimize even further? Every NOTAM counts at this point in the game, right? So some things that we've been looking at is how do we solve some of these issues that we're seeing with the data coming in on a daily basis, okay? And the problems that we have with semi-structured data, missing content, ambiguous data, right, they're not going to go away. And so can we leverage Databricks to help predict, optimize, and plan for some of these issues that we're seeing here? Well, to do that, we're going to need a lot of NOTAMs. We're going to need to think about it. And so that's where we started to build the haystack. And today we have about 20,000 NOTAMs in our 20 million NOTAMs in our data lakehouse today, and more are being added. Every day as we get more, we're throwing them in there. And in the past, these were all in a Hadoop cluster kind of sitting, not really being used or leveraged very much. But now that it's in a data platform, it's really opened up our eyes to be able to leverage and able to easily see and reference and use this data for all the team members going forward. And not only our team, but also teams across all of Boeing. So what we started to do is identify and build out some of the dashboards, just like David was showing you up there. In fact, one of those dashboards, like the worldwide view, came just a screenshot from Databricks I was showing you earlier. And then from that, we're starting to evaluate and identify how can we get a feedback loop and a mechanism to understand what's going on, right? So today, we have a group of analysts that are checking these things real time. Of course, we have automation that carries and handles a majority of the NOTAMs that come in, but for the ones that we quite can't figure out with the ambiguous data or some of those edge cases, right, they go to a manual group, a manual queue. And so what can we learn from that, right? What can we derive from that to either help make sure it doesn't happen next time, right, and actually prevent that from occurring, right, or predicting or automating in the future, or even when, as the analysts are updating the NOTAMs and identifying what needs to change, what can we learn from their decisions to help improve this going forward? Now, of course, it's not just helpful for our teams, it's also helpful for the rest of DAS. And that's been a really interesting endeavor because with Unity Catalog, we've been able to share information with the click of a button and do a lot more data collaboration. Now, this isn't new to us. We've been sharing information for many, many years. But usually it's been a conversation around APIs. And here's our API, here's our access to it, here's the Swagger spec. You can take a look. But they're very opinionated. They're very focused on particular use cases. And I think the conversation has really changed as we've started to say, here's the raw data, right? And so let's talk about your problem. What do we need to change? Or based on the data that we have, how can we improve or solve the particular issue that you're having here? And so that conversation is a lot easier when you can just, oh yeah, here you go. Take a look, tell me what you think, and let's talk about it some more, right? In fact, we had some cases where they were looking at the API, but of course it was different, or they couldn't identify, based on this option, what they had to do. But when we started looking at the data, we got a lot further along identifying, okay, this is how we can solve that problem for you. Another example is a coworker of mine. We were working with CU Boulder and some students there on a research project, and they said, hey, we really want to use some NOTAMs. And they reached out to me. We had some information available in our dev workspace, and they didn't even know, and I didn't even know this was going on until they said, hey, John, can we leverage that? And in the past, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but in the past, it would have been probably a week, several weeks, or even maybe a month or more trying to figure out who owns that data, where is it, how can I get it, can I get an extract from it, right? All those things where this was just literally an IM, yeah, let me open it up for you, not a problem, right? Handling it in a matter of minutes or hours instead of weeks and months. And then finally, once you have all this information, you start to understand it, that's when you can really do a lot more interesting things and look at AI, right? We're all looking at AI. And so with this time span of about 3 days, we did a hackathon, started playing with some machine learning, deep learning models, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But it's been pretty exciting to see the transition of where we're at and then where we're going over time. So what have we done with AI and MLflow? Well, the immediate problem, or one of the immediate problems that we started to ask questions about or try to understand better was about Q codes. And so what is a Q code? Well, it's a 5-character string associated to every NOTAM, the first letter being a Q, and then the 4 other characters talking about really the category of classification of that NOTAM. So in this case, you have a subject group, a predicate group, and then identifiers for each of those. So if I go back to the previous example of the NOTAM that we were showing earlier, the Q code is QMXLT, so in this way, taxiway limited to. And this particular NOTAM is talking about taxiways that are closed to aircraft with a wingspan of more than 118 feet. And the importance here is, I think, fairly obvious, but also the important thing on this NOTAM in particular is that Q code is how we can filter, sort, and categorize and make sure it's going to the right place that's going to be important or pertinent to the flight plans that are going there. And so over a 3-day period, we just got the team engaged. They had literally never logged into Databricks before. Right? They were not AI experts by any means, but just by playing with it a little bit, reading up on some demos and experiences, we were able to identify what is possible in this space in a short time span. And so we looked at several different classification models and techniques to identify, hey, can we predict a NOTAM, a Q code for a NOTAM? And the reason why that's important is not just because of filtering, but also because it doesn't always come in 100% accurate or correct, right? So we have what's called cases like quad X, where instead of getting those 4 characters, you just get all X's. Or it might only have 2 characters instead of 4. Or it might be we get multiple NOTAMs when it really, it's one NOTAM, but there's multiple in there, and they should really be divided, right? Or it might be a case where the Q code that we have, it's ambiguous, or you can have multiple Q codes. So maybe we should actually be applying more than one in this particular case, right? So how do we solve those problems? And that's where we started to look at AI and classification models. And I think we learned some interesting concepts, interesting ideas with a high degree of accuracy on leveraging just some examples like this. And the question we've really started to ask ourselves is, okay, how can we do this even better? How can we build a compound AI data flow that leverages these things, improves the accuracy and efficiency of our data pipelines, and do so in a way that's cost-effective, right? Because the last thing you want to do is send everything to an LLM, right, generative LLM, and eat up a ton of money, a ton of tokens, and include a lot of that latency into your data flow. And so this is where we're looking at maybe to start, we can use a basic machine learning classification models that are quick, easy, cost-effective, and then for the ones that we feel maybe have or need to have multiple classifications, that's where you can look at deep learning models, apply that sort of thing so that we can identify 2 or more. It may not be quite as accurate, or it may take a little bit longer, but at least it's still deterministic in nature. And then finally, if we figure out those problems, maybe there's other issues with the semi-structured content or textual information of the data, right? So people are typing this information in, and other times we may not be able to parse it really well. One example is timesheets. We actually can parse timesheets pretty well, but there are some edge cases that we have or struggle with a little bit. So in that particular case, if we have a NOTAM and you can't parse the timesheet, all right, you have a NOTAM, and it's runway closure, right, as an example. But then the issue here is if I can't parse the timesheet, I just know it's effective from this date to that date, and if you can't read that from a machine perspective, you can't really identify this flight plan can or cannot fly on that runway automatically, right? Someone has to manually read it, where in cases of a timesheet, it might only be closed for certain hours of the day. And so we don't want to limit flight plans or aircraft flying into a particular airport or runway just because we couldn't parse the darn timesheets, right? So once you identify these different issues, right, in the data, we can start to identify the solution based on the possible AI models that we have available to us and create what we call a compounded AI data flow. And eventually get to what I call the perfect NOTAM. The perfect NOTAM that is completely machine readable, right? It doesn't have any ambiguity in it, and it's something that we can share downstream so that any entity, any pilot, right, can make the right decision at the right time. And so what were the results out of the period and some of the work that we've been doing here? Well, it kind of looked like this. Using Databricks, we were able to parse and clean all the information that we had, run it through these models, and with a high degree of accuracy to predict the Q codes. So instead of manually sending this to the analysts every time we don't know what the answer is, we can automatically say this is what we think it is, and give them really a second pair of eyes, right, or multiple eyes on the problem, and help speed up that process and also give some sort of clarity or confidence level of what we think that Q code is. Now, of course, it's not all AI that we've found in value of Databricks. Sharing bulk data is another one. Pretty common, I think, across all of our companies. So how do we do that? Well, unique catalog, of course, right? And delta sharing. But it's been an interesting conversation as we talk more and more about how to share not only the typical NOTAM feed that we do share across all of our business units, but start to share more and more of that data. You start to think about other possibilities and things you can do with it, right? So talking more about NOTAMs and flight planning, talk about how we can speed up and improve the processes that we're saying NOTAMs to update our 424 data extracts. So the data, the navigational data that's going to the cockpit and the FMCs. What can we do with simulation or analytics, or even how we can change the briefing package even further with the more and more data that we have available to us. So what's next? Well, this is still in development. We're still kind of figuring things out, seeing where things are going. But we're super excited about it. And obviously, as we've learned more and more about even the technologies of this conference, right? Lake Base and all the opportunities or technologies are coming out on a regular basis. We're hoping to take advantage of that. And right now, I think we're at the stage where it's a pretty exciting journey for us, and it's only going to get better. And so with that, we want to share some of the lessons learned from that journey, and not only what we've done, but also some of the values here. And I think these are pretty common, right? I'm sure you've seen them before, used them. But it's a good reminder, right? Simply because we felt that this was going to be a multi-year effort and endeavor to go and understand this technology, integrate it, and we're still doing that, but at the same time, we've already gotten immediate value even just from our dev instance, right? We started to push this to UAT, started to have more conversations with customers and internal stakeholders, et cetera. So, I think that the really lesson learned here for me was don't wait, start immediately, and as soon as you play with it, you're going to learn a ton right away. So that being said, what I would say is just taking it back to the beginning, so thinking about that route back to the grocery store, right? If your data becomes less fragmented, then the route will become clear and your data will flow. So thank you.